How do you solve a problem like Boeing? Well, it's been another tumultuous month for a company that was once a bastion of corporate reliability. Airlines, regulators, and passengers are again in the eye of the storm. Yahoo Finance has been across this fast-moving story.
Boeing facing a Senate subcommittee next week on the growing safety concerns plaguing the company. And this comes as the embattled airplane manufacturer searches for its next chief executive officer. Joining us to discuss is Robert Spingarn. He's Melius Research Managing Director and Research Analyst for the aerospace, defense, and space sector. So obviously, Rob, it doesn't feel like the pressure on Boeing is letting up. Let's talk briefly about that committee hearing next week. What do you think we could learn new, if anything, out of that hearing? And what does a sort of best case scenario look like for Boeing?
Well, I think the best case scenario is going to rely on a lot more than just what happens next week. We may learn some new details from the whistleblower or those who testify next week. And it's clear, it's important that there's government oversight here, that they're asking questions and turning up the pressure, so to speak. And we've seen, I think, incremental response from Boeing, and it's going to continue.
And Rob, I'm just curious, listen, you know the company backwards and forwards. What do you make of the job Calhoun has actually done, sort of navigating the company through this crisis? What grade do you give him, Rob?
It goes back to culture. We've talked about culture a lot with this company, and unfortunately, all of the executives, I think, have been disserviced, if you will, by the movement of Boeing's headquarters out of Seattle in the early 2000s and to Chicago and now Northern Virginia. And so there's a bit of a distance between the factory floor and the executives. And I think that Dave Calhoun, maybe he didn't have all the information he needed. The question is, how could he improve that? I think the message is getting through. Unfortunately, it's taken a long time. We've had a lot of incremental movement and response in that message. You get the sense that we're at the point where the changes are going to be more significant than they have in the past, especially when you're changing the management team, you're changing the people at the top of the company.
Rob, do you think Calhoun will make it to the end of the year?
I don't know that he necessarily will, but I don't know that it's because of anything that happens at Boeing. I think there's a chance they may select the CEO before the end of the year, and then the timing would be sooner.
Who should take the reins, Rob, in your opinion? Any candidates?
Well, we here at Melius actually downgraded the stock about 10 days ago because we just felt the overhangs were too significant for the stock to work in the meantime while they're looking for management, replacing Dave Calhoun, while they're waiting to ramp up on their production. One of the folks that I think would be a very good candidate is Pat Shanahan, former acting Secretary of Defense and somebody with a 30-year career at Boeing prior to that. I also mentioned in one of my recent notes that an out-of-the-box choice could be somebody like SpaceX COO Gwynne Shotwell. You need somebody with an engineering background, with a production floor experience, program management. So you don't want a salesperson, you don't want a finance person, and a bunch of the other suggestions have focused in those areas. I don't think that's the right answer.
Obviously, this would be a very challenging position for any of these folks to take on. So it's not just finding the right person, it's convincing them to take the job, right? Do you think that the idea of taking on this challenge would be something that would be appealing to some of these folks?
I think so, but I don't know personally. The two people I mentioned, I haven't spoken to. I don't know what their interest level would be. So this is based in Pat Shanahan's case. I know him, but it's been some time. That said, I would imagine the company is very important to him. He, of course, is the acting CEO at Spirit AeroSystems, which is involved in a lot of this right now. So I think there's a possibility. I mentioned Gwynne Shotwell. It's probably a big ask to have her leave something like a SpaceX. One of the things that folks do look for when they change roles at the CEO level is, where is the stock? Is the stock near a bottom? And therefore, if I can get in there and do what I need to do and improve the company, can I benefit from an increase in the stock? And so that might be appealing to some folks who are out there.
And Rob, finally, I just wanted to switch gears while we're talking about leadership and ask you about another stock in your coverage, and that's Hexcel, which just announced that unexpectedly that the former CEO of Spirit AeroSystems, Tom Gentile, was going to take over as its CEO. This was not greeted very enthusiastically by the street, to put it lightly. What do you make of that move, and is that a mistake?
I think I know both companies fairly well. I know both CEOs well. I do think it was a surprise to the market, since Tom Gentile recently left Spirit AeroSystems, and the problems there were similar to Boeing. There were operational issues on the factory floor, execution missteps, if you will. And unfortunately, folks are going to look at Tom through that lens. He's a very capable person. I've worked with him for many, many years. I think he understands the industry extremely well. This is a little bit different. He's going from an aerostructures or fuselage assembly company to a materials science company, if you will. Hexcel manufactures carbon fiber composites that go into those structures. So it's a little bit of a different type of work, but he's familiar with those things. But understandably, after what's happened at Spirit, and he did preside over much of it, there will be some questions as to whether that was the right choice.
Rob, great insight and perspective. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming on the show.
Pleasure.
The airline industry is facing mounting scrutiny following a new 737 incident that occurred Sunday when an engine cover came off during takeoff. Southwest is reviewing all of its Boeing aircrafts, but has declined to say when that specific plane's engine was last checked. Let's discuss with our next guest here. We have Helene Becker, TD Cowen Senior Research Analyst. Thank you so much, Helene, for being here. I want to talk about your call on Love, the ticker for Southwest, because you'd been famously bullish on this name, and we had talked about it previously, even after kind of the holiday flights fiasco. But then last fall, you changed it to hold from a buy. Could this latest news from Southwest potentially push you into a sell rating on the name?
Well, you never know, right? Depending on how things go. But right now, we're comfortable with the hold rating. This is one incident, but to your point, it follows the series of incidents, not just at Southwest, but at other airlines involving Boeing aircraft. But when you think about it in the whole scheme of things, how many flights there are per day and how mostly safe they are, and how few incidences we have, I don't think this would cause me to change anything in the short term.
Ellen, how are you evaluating the risk here just ahead with what's to come from Boeing? When you talk about leadership changes, when you talk about increased regulation, what exactly that could mean going forward, not just for Southwest, but more broadly speaking for the airline sector? How are you evaluating that?
So for the airlines, our concern is that the industry won't be able to grow to handle the demand because of probably three things. One is increased oversight. Second is aircraft delivery delays that continue and have continued for the past four years. And then the third concern that we have is just that costs continue to grow faster than revenues are growing. And that's a problem from a margin perspective. And it's a problem because airlines may not have enough money to reinvest in the business. And of course, you want them to continue to do that, both aircraft and technology.
So from an investor perspective, Helene, which airlines would you say are the most battleground, like safest is the easiest way to say it, protected from all of the headwinds that the aerospace industry has been experiencing as of late?
Well, the airline industry is very safe, so I don't want to give anybody the wrong impression that it's not, or that we're concerned that it's not safe. We're very comfortable with it. But I will say that for 2024, Delta is our best idea, followed by Copa Airlines, which is Panamanian based, and then United is another stock we like that we have a buy on, and then we have a couple of other buys on smaller airlines. So I mean, look, it's going to be a pretty good year. It may not be as good financially for the industry as 2022 was, but second half should be better than first half. We still have some maintenance cost headwinds that the industry is dealing with. American and United specifically have flight attendant contracts that are in the process of being negotiated. And we know that everybody wants to get those contracts done. Southwest flight attendants are currently voting on a second tentative agreement, so they'd like to get that done as well. And so when we think about 24, we think we're going to have a good summer. There's still a lot of demand for air travel. At some point, people will start to run out of money or have taken all their bucket list trips and maybe slow down. 4 is the new 3. Maybe people have to be back in the office 5 days a week, 4 days a week. So traveling every week may be increasingly difficult. But I mean, look, the summer's coming and most trips are being booked now for the summer. They're booked between mid-March and mid-May. And there seems to still be a lot of demand for especially international travel.
Helene, when it comes to that stronger demand that you are expecting, you mentioned Delta among the top picks. We're actually going to hear from Delta tomorrow before the bell. What are you expecting there in terms of their ability to offset some of the headwinds that you highlighted there when it comes to maintenance costs, when it comes to higher fuel costs? What do you think that will specifically look like for Delta and what we'll hear from management?
Yeah, I think in general, the industry is going to talk numbers down because fuel costs are up. So I think about that. For the first quarter, we think it's going to be hard to have a positive surprise, primarily because as the quarter went on, you had higher fuel costs, especially in March. And then in January, this is April and the weather's starting to get a little bit better. But people forget how bad it was in January and early part of February, especially in the West, where Delta has a hub in Salt Lake City. So we think it's going to be hard to have a first quarter surprise. We think second quarter will be affected by the maintenance cost headwinds that I mentioned. And then third quarter, that's the big quarter for every airline. And we, like I said, we think international is going to remain strong. We think a lot of people still want to go to Italy and London and Paris. You have the Olympics. Not that that is ever a bad thing. And I just think that we'll see good results for the July-August period, certainly.
Helene, you mentioned here in your research that Lilium has a new CFO, and it reminds me of what we're seeing in the E-VTOL space. A lot of our audience of retail investors interested in names like Joby, Archer, and of course Lilium. To what extent do you think the eVTOL space has legs to continue to grow when we don't necessarily have clarity yet on certification from the FAA?
Yeah, so we don't officially cover the stocks. We monitor them, but I don't write on them specifically, and I don't keep earnings models. So with that as a caveat, I would just mention our view is that it takes 10 years and costs $1 billion to get a new aircraft certified. And I know that sounds a bit, I don't know if tongue-in-cheek is the right expression, but I know it sounds a bit cheeky, certainly, to say that. But look, the industry has been developing for the past almost a decade. And the companies that you mentioned, Joby, Lilium, Volocopter, EHang, which is based in China, and there's a few, Archer in the US, they're coming to market with their aircraft designs. Their designs have been approved by the FAA, and now the certification process starts, and they have to prove safety. Aviation is multiple points of safety. You have to have redundancy in the systems to make it as 100% safe, or as close to 100% safe as you can. And so that's where they stand. So from here, let's say the runway is to probably 2027, 2028. And then, of course, the FAA has been sidetracked by all these other issues with Boeing and oversight in terms of airlines and so on. And so, yeah, everything takes longer than you think, I guess is the bottom line.
Helene Becker, we really appreciate you taking the time giving us some insight, especially ahead of tomorrow's print from Delta. TD Cowen's Senior Research Analyst. Thanks so much, Helene.
Thank you.
Boeing facing another leadership shakeup and the second CEO change since its 737 MAX 8 crash in 2018. Dave Calhoun announcing he will step down from the helm at the end of 2024. Our next guest remains bullish on the aerospace company, though, saying the move was both predictable and thoughtful. Jason Gursky, who is the City Managing Director and Aerospace and Defense Lead Analyst, joins us now. Great to have you here with us. Just take us into your thesis now that this management change is taking place and the second that has come because of the MAX line.
Yeah, sure. I think we step back here and look at the big picture, right? We've got an industry that has very, very large backlogs, stretching out to the 2030s, well into the 2030s. In some cases, for some of these product lines, you have a duopoly. So it's not as if, Boeing's customers have a lot of options here. So you've got huge backlogs, a lot of demand from customers. But you've got a company that's struggling post-pandemic to produce aircraft in the way that it should, kind of by design. So they've got some things that they've got to fix, and part of that process, I think, is going to be bringing in some new management to help them get that done. So I don't think structurally the story's changed here, the long-term story, which is why we remain relatively constructive on the company and its stock. We've just got to get through the near term, which in these kinds of situations with all turnarounds is always a bit messy.
Yeah, Jason, talk to us a little bit more about not specifically who obviously you think the new successor is going to be, the new CEO is going to be, but more so in terms of who they would be looking for. Do you think they're likely to go outside the company, maybe even potentially go outside the industry? Walk us through what you think is the most likely scenario here.
Yeah, I think they're going to look at both internal and external candidates, right? They had recently elevated Stephanie Pope to the position of Chief Operating Officer. She has, a pretty accomplished background there within Boeing, having led the services business, CFO of the other two divisions of the company. Even spent some time in investor relations, talking to people like myself all of the time. So I think she's beloved within the company. So I think if they're going to go internal, she would obviously be the leading candidate. I think, to your point, it's a question perhaps of external versus internal. And, I don't know how this will play out. I think most investors would certainly desire to have somebody with a strong engineering background, somebody that has a proven ability to lead a manufacturing organization, I think would be pretty helpful at this point. And there are certainly, lots of current and ex-executives across the industry that have that background.
Jason, overall, would you say it's a good thing here for shareholders, new leadership?
Well, to be honest with you, I think the way that they're doing this is the right way to do it, right? Suggesting that they're going to have the existing leadership step out at the end of the year, so give themselves plenty of time to conduct a really methodical search, give the current CEO plenty of time to de-risk what's going on at the company. They've got to get through this FAA process and get permission to increase their production rates over time. So look, I think they're doing this the right way, right? Give themselves 7, 8, 9 months to go find somebody new and allow the current guy to continue the work at hand. I think what would have been worse is just to have him leave and then, put somebody in and then an interim basis or not have a really smooth transition. And I think the way that they're doing this is spot on.
Jason, one of the things that we were discussing at the desk yesterday was if this is an external hire that they bring in and they give that person carte blanche to really figure out what needs to be changed at the company, what do investors need to be paying closest attention to, as there might be a major type of restructuring or repositioning even of the internal culture that has broader ramifications to the stock price?
Yeah, look, this focus on safety is, job one at this point, right? And making sure that they are designing, culture is a really hard thing, right? It's a very intangible thing. So that what I think they need to do is if they're looking to change culture, is put in a series of work processes in place that allow for them to really emphasize the behaviors that they would like to see from the organization, right? So there are all kinds of experts in change management and designing processes that will be at hand here. Both internal and external, I would imagine, are going to be helping them out. But look, safety is the number one thing, right? And the pandemic has been really, really difficult on this industry, right? This is not an isolated issue to Boeing and its suppliers. We're seeing this across the industrial base, including on the defense side. The difficulty in producing quantities and the quality that the industry kind of has always expected of these companies. And this great resignation that we had during the pandemic resulted in a lot younger people coming into the workforce. I'll go on just for one tiny little tangent here. The head of procurement at Airbus at the air show last year suggested that its American supply base used to fire and hire people, fire them during the downturn, hire them during the upturn. And in previous downturn or upturns, after a downturn, they'd reach back and hire back 8 out of the 10 people that they'd fired or furloughed during the recessionary environment. This time around, they've only been able to hire back 2. So 8 out of 10 in the past, 2 out of 10 this time. We've got a young workforce, and when you have a young workforce, you probably need to be putting in some processes and having some inspectors to check quality.
So Jason, with all of that in mind, of course, another question here at this is just in terms of the lost market share that we've seen from Boeing, Airbus, the rival there, benefiting from this. Does some of that shift that we've seen in power, does that have staying power, or do you see Boeing have the ability here to eventually win back that lost market share?
Yeah, the market share shifts are going to be pretty de minimis, I think, right? We have typically Boeing-only customers, Airbus-only customers, and then a kind of smallish, really, relative to the overall industry, group of airlines in the middle that fly mixed fleets. So the opportunity here for Boeing to lose share is kind of with those airlines in the middle that are operating mixed fleets. And I spoke earlier of the fact that they've got huge backlogs that stretch out into the 2030s. Airbus really doesn't have all that many available delivery slots to offer up to quote unquote unhappy Boeing customers. So I don't think we're going to see material share shifts here. I think if we did see a historically Boeing only customer decide to open up the aperture and begin taking deliveries of Airbus customers, that's when I think maybe you get a little bit more worried. But to date, we haven't seen that. And again, Airbus really doesn't have any delivery slots to give any of these airlines at this point. This is really a question of Boeing's just got to put its head down, be transparent with customers, be transparent with the FAA, and get its work done.
Mm-hmm. We will see whether or not that actually plays out. All right, Jason Gursky, always great to have you. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us here this morning. Citi's Managing Director and Aerospace and Defense Lead Analyst. Thanks.